My name is Georgia Anderson, and I am 24 years old. I was born on the edge of Hollow Creek, a sleepy southern town tucked beneath the hills of North Carolina, where the land smells like cedar and the air grows thick in summer. My father, Samuel Anderson, was a carpenter with cracked hands and a loyal heart. My mother died when I was 11, leaving behind only her hymnal, her silver locket, and the faint scent of gardenia that sometimes lingered in our kitchen long after her absence. We weren't poor, but we were far from the polished world of the Hollow Creek Country Club, where polished shoes clicked on marble floors and ladies in ivory gloves lifted their noses to the sky. The country club sat like a castle at the top of Sycamore Hill. Red brick, white pillars, horses grazing beyond the iron gate. And every December, they hosted the one thing every girl in town dreamed about, but only the right kind were invited to the Hollow Creek Christmas Gala. Candles, velvet gowns, chocolate fountains, champagne towers. It wasn't just a party. It was a door, and if you were lucky enough to walk through it, your whole life changed. I wasn't invited. Not when I was 16, not when I was 18, and certainly not this year. But the sting wasn't as bad in the past, because back then, I was just a carpenter's daughter with dust under my fingernails. Now, I had something more. I had love, or so I thought. His name was Thomas Whitlow, tall, clean-shaven, with the kind of jaw that always looked like it was clenched around secrets. He worked at the mayor's office, wore gray suits that smelled like pine and smoke, and looked at me like I was a poem he hadn't finished reading. I met him the summer I turned 22. He came into my father's workshop to commission a custom wine cabinet. "I heard your daddy builds better wood than the boys at Whitlow and Sons," he said with a smirk, "and I stain better than most of them too," I replied. He laughed. That laugh, it ruined me. What started with wine cabinets turned into coffee on the porch, then dances in my father's barn, then kisses behind the cedar trees, then stolen afternoons and promises under stars. "I don't care about those people up on Sycamore Hill," he'd whisper. "I want someone real." And I believed him. I believed him when he told me the gala was shallow. I believed him when he kissed my knuckles and called me my Georgia Clay. I believed him when he said he wouldn't go this year, until he did. I was sweeping the porch when Evelyn Mayer, the dressmaker's daughter, ran up our hill breathless. "Georgia," she panted, "you best come see this." We walked down to Main Street where the windows of Clemson's Dry Goods faced the road. And there, in the center of the hand-painted Christmas Gala poster, was a name in gold ink, Mr. Thomas Whitlow, and guest Miss Penelope Barrington. Penelope, the daughter of the banker, the girl with the white smile and diamond earrings, the girl whose family had a standing box seat at the Charleston Opera. I didn't cry. Not yet. I walked home slowly, every step burning hotter than the last. I passed the bakery, the post office, the well where Thomas once said I'd throw a coin in if I thought it'd get me another hour with you. I felt like a fool. I sat on the porch, staring into the orchard, and let the truth settle in my chest like ice. He lied. He never meant to choose me. I was never going to be enough for a man who was raised to admire chandeliers more than character. And then it hit me. It wasn't just Thomas. It was all of them. The women in their pearls, the men with their polished boots, the committee that never even looked at my application letter last year, the mayor who shook my hand and then wiped his own with a handkerchief. The system built to keep girls like me outside, while they laughed inside, under string lights and chandeliers. That was the night I stopped dreaming of dancing in the country club and started planning how to own it. I didn't sleep that night. The rain came down in sheets, tapping against the tin roof like footsteps I didn't want to hear. But I just sat there on the porch swing, wrapped in Mama's old blanket, staring straight ahead into the dark, like something might appear if I glared long enough. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was betrayal wrapped in silk and arrogance. It wasn't just that Thomas chose someone else, it was who he chose, and where he chose to take her. He had promised me the world, and when it came time to deliver, he gave it to Penelope Barrington, a girl who had never built anything with her own hands, but was born with country club champagne already on her breath. I kept replaying his words. "I don't want that life. I want you, Georgia." Liar. But I wasn't going to waste another tear on him, or on them. That night, I reached under my bed and pulled out the cigar box I'd hidden since Mama passed. It had a faded picture of me at age 9, Mama's silver brooch, and most importantly my dream notebook. No one ever knew about it. Inside were sketches and plans I'd drawn over the years. not for dresses or ballrooms, for buildings. Real ones, a carpentry workshop of my own, a home for orphans, a boarding house for women who'd been cast aside, and right in the middle, a sketch labeled The Anderson House for All Who Were Once Left Out. It had windows wide open, a grand staircase, and a sign that said welcome instead of members only. It didn't look like a country club, but now, it could become one. That night, something dangerous bloomed inside me, not rage, not grief, resolve. If they wouldn't open the door for me, I'd build a new one. No, I'd buy the one they slammed in my face and tear it off its hinges. The next morning, I visited Mr. Hargrove, the only banker in town who knew my father as more than just a carpenter. I need to speak with you, I said. About a loan. He looked over his spectacles. For what purpose? I set the notebook in front of him. Real estate. Something on Sycamore Hill. His brow arched. The Hollow Creek Country Club? I nodded. He laughed once. Georgia. I doubt they'd ever sell to. I didn't ask for advice, I interrupted. I asked for a number. Mr. Hargrove stared at me like I'd grown horns, but after a long silence, he leaned back and whispered, there's a rumor. They're in debt, bad debt, the club. The old owners took out a second mortgage last fall. How much? I asked. Last I heard, over 25 million. It might as well have been 100, but I didn't flinch. I smiled, because debts mean vulnerability, and vulnerable is exactly what I needed them to be. The next step was finding someone who believed in more than velvet gowns and champagne. That someone turned out to be Clara Belle Langley, a widow who once ran the town's orphanage before the city shut it down for being a blemish on the district's image. She now lived in a cottage outside town, with 15 cats and a fierce glare that could melt stone. I knocked on her door with trembling hands. Why are you here? She asked flatly. I told her everything, from Thomas, to the gala, to the idea of turning the club into a shelter for those the town refused to see. I expected her to laugh, but instead, she leaned in and said, I've waited 50 years for a girl to say those words. She handed me a folder filled with property contacts, donor names, and best of all, architectural records of the country club. She'd been planning something like this her whole life. I just never had the fire left to light it, she said. Well, I replied, I brought the match. Word started to spread quietly through Hollow Creek. Not about revenge, not yet, just whispers that a girl in muddy boots and a flannel dress was meeting with lawyers from out of town. Whispers that Miss Georgia Anderson had purchased a 10-acre orchard lot behind Sycamore Hill, and whispers that the country club's board hadn't paid their dues since August. I began to receive letters, some kind, some cruel. One envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single card. You'll never be one of us. I pinned it to my wall. Next to it, I wrote, good. I never wanted to be. I wanted to be better. It was late October when I heard the news. The Hollow Creek Country Club was officially up for sale. It would be listed in 3 weeks. Private bids only. That gave me 21 days. 21 days to gather partners, to raise offers, to dig into every inch of their financial wounds. And I wasn't alone anymore. Old women, outcasted boys, forgotten girls, rejected widows. All of them people who had once stood outside the gala windows started walking toward me, checkbooks in hand, not for vengeance, for redemption. But deep in my chest, I still carried something colder. I wanted them to see me walk through that front door, not as a guest, as the owner. 3 weeks, that's all I had. 21 days to prepare the greatest performance of my life, not on a stage, not in front of lights, but in the back rooms of men who'd spent decades ensuring women like me stayed quiet, grateful, and invisible. But I'd learned something dangerous about those men. They underestimated silence. The quieter I was, the more they assumed I couldn't strike. And while they clinked bourbon glasses and boasted about selling the club to another fine gentleman, I was signing papers behind closed doors, building an army out of misfits and ghosts. Clara Belle Langley called them the no-names. They were women who'd once served hors d'oeuvres at the gala but had never been invited to sit. Men who'd done repairs on the club's broken heating but been forced to enter through the back door. One girl, Ruthie Jones, barely 20, had once scrubbed gala dishes until then been told not to come back too often. Now they were the ones helping me gather numbers, assess the property's structural flaws, and prepare the offer. They didn't care about revenge, but I did. By the 5th day, I'd already gathered a preliminary $4 million in pledges from small-town donors, forgotten trusts, and land sales Clara had been waiting 20 years to close. I began spending my days in a rented office above Gentry's saddlery. The floors creaked. The walls smelled like leather and tobacco. But it was mine. I studied every inch of the club's mortgage, every missed payment, every defaulted maintenance contract. They owed money to 8 different entities, and the president of the board, a man named Clyde Beauchamp, was growing desperate. At night, I'd sit with Ruthie and Clara and map out the plan. We called it Operation Red Ribbon, named after the silk ribbons the gala women used to wear around their wrists like a badge of purity and privilege. Clara poured tea while Ruthie lit candles and took notes. We won't just make an offer, I told them. We'll make one so clean, so irresistible, that even their pride won't be able to argue with it. And when it's ours? Ruthie asked. We open it on Christmas morning, I said. And not to the ones on the guest list. On the 9th day, I ran into Thomas Whitlow. I was leaving the notary's office when he stepped in front of me, wearing his usual wool coat, smelling of firewood and regret. Georgia, he said. I didn't stop walking. Georgia, please. I turned. Not because I wanted to, but because the fire inside me demanded he see what it had become. You lied, I said flatly. I didn't lie. You stood on my porch and said you wouldn't go. I cut him off. You danced with her under crystal chandeliers while I watched from the sidewalk like a beggar. His lips parted, but no words came. I'm not angry that you chose her, I added. I'm angry that you made me believe I ever had a seat in your world. I was scared, he finally whispered. No, I said. You were raised to believe I wasn't enough. Then I walked away, and I didn't look back. By day 14, the board began receiving private offers. One came from a lawyer in Charleston, another from a developer in Raleigh who wanted to turn the land into a hunting lodge and gentleman's retreat. But then came mine. The offer was clean, full, and all cash. $25,000, backed by verified pledges, land equity, and an anonymous consortium of female investors I'd rallied under the name WASA, Women Advocating Shelter and Hope, and the name on the contract? Miss Georgia Ruth Anderson. By day 17, I received a letter from Clyde Beauchamp. It was stiff and formal, but I could smell the desperation between the lines. Your offer is under review. We have concerns about your intentions for the property and hope you understand the historical significance of the country club to Hollow Creek Society. I wrote back. I understand perfectly. That's why I'm buying it. By day 20, I got the call. They'd accepted. The Hollow Creek Country Club, once guarded like a royal palace, was mine. The board voted 5-2 in favor of my offer. The 2 who opposed resigned in protest. The rest, Clyde included, pretended it was a strategic decision for the club's long-term viability. They didn't know what was coming, because I had no intention of preserving the old walls they built to keep people out. I was going to knock them down. That night, I returned to my father's old workshop, the place where I first met Thomas, the place where my mother once carved her name into a beam above the door, the place where I learned the value of building things that last. I ran my fingers along the wood, splintered and honest, and I whispered, We're going in, Mama, and we're bringing everyone with us. The contract was signed, the ink was dry, and just like that, the most exclusive place in Hollow Creek, the one that once shut me out without so much as a glance, belonged to Georgia Anderson, daughter of a carpenter, and not anyone's guest. I held the deed in my hands on a rainy morning, wrapped in brown parchment, like a gift the universe had been saving just for me. The paper smelled of oak and cold ink. I pressed it to my chest, closed my eyes, and smiled, but the real work hadn't even begun. Owning it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The first time I unlocked the country club gates, the air felt different, like the trees themselves were watching. Clara, Ruthie, and a handful of others were with me. We pushed open the grand oak doors and stepped into the very space we'd never been allowed to enter as guests. The ballroom was still dressed in silence. Dust shimmered in shafts of morning light. Velvet drapes, once wine red, now faded at the edges, and in the middle of it all stood a massive chandelier, shaped like a crown, still, silent, untouchable. I stared at it. This was where Penelope Barrington had twirled in her beaded gown, where Thomas had clinked champagne glasses, where men had toasted to power. Now it would echo with new sounds, children laughing, mothers singing, footsteps from worn boots and torn coats, because this place was no longer a throne room. It was about to become a shelter. We began renovations the next day. Clara brought blueprints. Ruthie coordinated volunteers. I handled the permits, negotiated with local labor, and sold off everything unnecessary. The wine cellar? Emptied. The billiard room? Cleared and transformed into a dormitory. The exclusive smoking lounge? Torn down to make space for a kitchen that could feed 200. The chandelier? Still hanging, but with every cobweb I brushed away. I imagine it watching me, confused and flickering. Who gave her the key? What's she doing here? In boots and a bandana, hammer in hand. And the answer was simple. I gave myself permission. No one else ever had, and no one else ever would again. News traveled fast. By the end of the first week, whispers became headlines. Small town papers picked up the story. Local woman purchases historic country club, plans shelter for the needy. Then came the visitors. Some came curious, others came furious. Penelope Barrington arrived with her mother on the third Monday. They stood at the gate, dressed like winter royalty, eyes narrowed at the sawdust scattered on marble steps. You're ruining it, Penelope hissed. This place is part of the town's identity. I didn't stop swinging my hammer. I just said, good. It's about time the town gets a new one. Her mother turned red. You have no idea what you're doing. Oh, I do, I said calmly. I'm replacing your legacy with something that actually helps people. They left in a huff, heels clicking like gunshots on marble. That night, we toasted with hot tea and leftover cornbread. Clara stood up and raised her cup. To Georgia, she said, who kicked open the door and then tore down the whole damn wall. Laughter filled the once hollow room. It was the first real gala that place had ever seen. But not everyone clapped. Behind closed doors, the whispers got sharper. The town council called an emergency meeting. Clyde Beauchamp tried to pull permits. Anonymous letters arrived calling me a disgrace, a socialist, a girl playing queen. Thomas even sent a note. This isn't the way, Georgia. You're embarrassing yourself. Come talk. I crumpled it. He hadn't come to the club himself. He hadn't come when I opened the gates to families. He hadn't come when I stood on the front lawn and read aloud the names of every girl denied entry since 19-1. But now when I stood in power, he wanted to speak. Too late. On the final Sunday of November, we held a pre-opening walkthrough for the community. Dozens showed up. Women who once worked the gala kitchen came in their Sunday best. Children clutched their mothers' hands as they stepped onto floors that once rejected them. The same marble floors I had once been too afraid to walk on. We showed them the reading room, the bunk beds, the chapel. We showed them dignity. At the end of the tour, I led everyone into the ballroom. The chandelier sparkled now, newly cleaned, but still defiant. I left this one piece untouched, I said, because I want everyone who sleeps here to know they're not beneath this light. They belong under it. Silence, then applause, then tears. Christmas was still weeks away, but it already felt like we'd unwrapped something priceless. We hadn't just taken back a space. We'd reclaimed a right, the right to stand where others said we could not. December arrived with a hush. The town of Hollow Creek blanketed itself in snow early that year. Everything turned white except the fire growing inside me. The transformation of the country club wasn't just bricks and nails anymore. It had become something else entirely, a message, a reclamation, a new tradition, one that didn't ask for invitations, or polished names, or lace gloves with pearl buttons. The Christmas Gala was approaching, the same one they'd never let me attend, not once in 24 years. But this year, there would still be a gala, my gala, and the guest list? Everyone. The town was buzzing. Word spread like cinnamon on cider, sweet to some, bitter to others. The mayor avoided the press. Penelope Barrington left for Charleston early, citing holiday stress. And Thomas? Thomas sent another letter. Not to apologize, not to beg. This time it simply read, "You've changed." I didn't reply. Of course I'd changed. They'd force me to. The night before Christmas Eve, I stayed late at the club with Ruthie and Clara. The chandeliers were lit. The fireplace roared. Tables were set, not with crystal, but with hand-painted ceramics made by the local school children, wreaths made from thrifted lace, ribbons stitched by women from the mill, cookies shaped like stars, some cracked, some misshapen, all beautiful. It's better than anything they ever had, Clara whispered, her old hands smoothing a tablecloth, and she was right, because everything here was built by the forgotten for the forgotten. The next morning, the day of the gala, I woke early. I put on my mother's brooch. It was tarnished, the clasp bent, but it still caught the light just right. Then I brushed out my hair, slipped on my father's old carpenter's coat, and walked through the snow to the place that once said, "You don't belong here." Now, it said, "Welcome home." By mid-afternoon, they began arriving, not the old crowd, but the right crowd, families in patched coats, children holding hands, women in scarves and work boots, men who had fought in wars but never found a roof to sleep under. We had food, we had music, we had warmth. The ballroom, once a place where my name would have been laughed off a guest list, was now echoing with laughter, the kind that heals. Ruthie sang. Clara gave a toast. And me? I stood beside the chandelier and told a story. I used to stand outside those gates, I said, my voice soft but steady. I thought if I worked hard enough, or dressed right, or loved the right man, maybe one day they'd let me in. I looked around at the faces, tired, glowing, expectant, but they never did. And that turned out to be the greatest gift they ever gave me, because it forced me to build something they never could. I gestured to the walls. This place isn't about perfection, it's about protection. And it doesn't matter where you're from, what you wear, or what your name sounds like. If you need a place to be seen, to be safe, to start again, this door is always open. There was silence, then a child clapped, then another, then the whole room, and for the first time, I felt it, not just victory, peace. Later that evening, when most had gone to bed in the dormitories, I wandered the halls. I paused at the grand mirror. In the foyer, the same mirror where Penelope once admired herself in a silk gown. Now it reflected something different, a girl with mud on her boots, splinters in her fingers, and her mother's brooch glowing like firelight. A woman who'd been told no so many times she built a world where yes lived permanently. I smiled, then walked past the mirror, because I didn't need to be seen anymore. I had become the one doing the seeing. That night, under the chandelier, I found Clara staring up at it. "You ever think about taking it down?" she asked. I shook my head. No, let it stay. Why? Because when the next girl walks in here after being turned away somewhere else, I want her to look up and know that light is hers now. The morning after Christmas, I woke up before dawn. The country club, no, the shelter was silent. The grand halls, once filled with music and laughter, now hummed with a different kind of sound, breathing. Dozens of souls asleep under warm quilts, tucked in safety for the first time in who knows how long. I walked past them in the dim hallways, men who once slept under bridges, women who fled broken homes, children clutching dolls made of rags. I tucked a loose blanket here, closed a drafty window there. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but what I felt was heavier. Winning had a strange taste. It wasn't like the stories. No cheering crowds, no medals, no sweet kiss from a handsome hero who suddenly realized your worth. It was quiet, because revenge doesn't shout. It whispers. Late at night, when the noise is gone and the lights have dimmed, that's when the questions come. I stepped into the ballroom alone. The chandelier swayed gently in the morning air, glowing with the first gold of sunrise. My reflection stared back from the wax floors. I stood where Penelope once twirled, where Thomas once laughed, where I once imagined myself as a girl who'd never be enough. And then, like it had been waiting for the perfect moment to break, I cried. For my mother, who never saw me cross the threshold. For my father, who believed in me but never dared dream this big. For the girl I used to be, standing outside the gates with her heart in her throat. For everything I lost to become who I am. The tears came fast, ugly, loud, hot. Not from weakness, from release. I sank to my knees and let it happen, every sob echoing against the ballroom walls. I had taken back the place that had once tried to erase me, and now I needed to forgive myself for ever wanting their approval in the first place. Later, that morning, I found Ruthie in the kitchen, rolling dough with two toddlers. "Sleep okay?" she asked, looking at my swollen eyes. I nodded. Sometimes a girl just needs to cry in a ballroom. She smiled. "You're allowed." She passed me a warm biscuit. "Also, someone's asking for you out front." I froze. Who? Didn't say. But he looks like someone who's used to getting what he wants. I stepped outside and saw him leaning against the gatepost like he owned the place. Thomas Whitlow, same wool coat, same winter smoke scent, same jaw that used to weaken my resolve. He straightened when he saw me. His hands were in his pockets. His eyes tired. "Georgia." I crossed my arms. "You lost the right to say my name." "I know." Silence. He looked over the lawn, where snow had begun to melt into muddy patches. "It's beautiful, what you did," he said softly. I didn't respond. He rubbed his neck. I wasn't brave enough to stand by you. No, I agreed. You weren't. I kept thinking you'd fade, that maybe you'd stop. I laughed bitterly. You thought I was just a poor girl with too much spirit. You didn't realize I was born in fire. He nodded slowly. I regret it. I met his eyes. I don't, I said. Because if you had stayed, if you had chosen me, I might never have built this. I might have spent my life trying to fit into your world, instead of creating my own. A long pause. Do you hate me? I shook my head. No, that would make you important. Then I turned to go. Inside, I sat beside Clara in the reading room. She poured us both tea. You okay? She asked. I nodded. He came to say sorry. Did you forgive him? I stirred my cup. I forgave myself instead. She smiled wide. That's better. That evening, I stood once more beneath the chandelier. This time, not as a carpenter's daughter or a girl rejected by a gala. Not even as the new owner, but as something more than I ever imagined, a builder of belonging. And just before the candles were blown out, Ruthie handed me a hand-painted sign. She'd made it with the kids that morning. The words brought tears to my eyes. Welcome home, the Anderson House Shelter, not a country club, not a place for gowns and glass, but a place where every soul would have a door they could walk through, no guest list needed. Winter faded slowly in Hollow Creek. January came with gray skies and soft winds that carried the scent of wood smoke and clean beginnings. The Anderson House Shelter stayed full. Some stayed for a night, others for weeks, but all left with something more than they arrived with. Dignity. I spent those first weeks in the new year working alongside them. No office, no title on a door, just my hands and my time, fixing leaky windows, teaching a child to read, writing letters for a war widow whose eyes had grown to dim. I had walked through these halls once as a ghost. Now I moved as a builder, and yet, revenge has a way of echoing. Even long after the victory, you hear the voices. One day in mid-January, I received a letter. No return address. Just thick, expensive paper sealed with a wax insignia. I opened it carefully. You've made your point, Miss Anderson. Now, please consider the cost. You've shamed families, damaged reputations. There's a way to do things. This wasn't it. I folded the letter and slid it under the door of the supply closet. It belonged. With dust and rusted hinges, they still didn't get it. This was never about shaming anyone. This was about showing someone what happens when you deny someone long enough, when you underestimate them. A week later, I was in the ballroom helping lay out bedding for a stormy night when an unfamiliar woman walked in. She wore no pearls, no gloves, just a coat to sizes too large and a child at her hip. Her name was Esther Cole. The child, Lana, no more than 4. She didn't ask for anything. She just stood near the door, eyes wide, looking at the chandelier. You can come in, I said. She hesitated. Are you sure? I nodded. You're not late. You're exactly on time. She stepped inside like the floor might collapse beneath her. I took her hand, led her to the dining room, showed her the bed, the toys, the warmth. That night, as Lana slept wrapped in a quilt, Esther sat beside me in the common room and whispered, I used to clean this place. Back when I was 17, I scrubbed floors here, but never sat in a chair. I handed her a teacup. She took it with both hands, and just like that, another ghost came home. The town still didn't know what to make of me. Some praised, some sneered, whispers in church pews, furtive glances in the bakery, an anonymous note left in the hardware store that read, one good deed doesn't erase her disgrace. But that's the thing about transformation, it doesn't beg for applause. It simply keeps going. Ruthie found an old journal in one of the locked cabinets. It had belonged to a former board member. Inside were pages detailing guest lists, donations, gossip. One passage caught my eye. Miss Georgia Anderson's application denied. Too plain. No known family worth. May distract from the other girls. I showed it to Clara. She didn't flinch. Then I suppose, she said, you became the distraction they feared most. By February, the Anderson house was not just a shelter. It became a sanctuary. People came not just for warmth or food, but to learn. We started classes, sewing, carpentry, literacy. Each evening, I watched as the chandeliers lit not gowns, but growth. Children read poems under their glow. Men built shelves by candlelight. Mothers braided hair in the corner while telling stories of their youth. There was one chandelier left in the west wing we hadn't restored. Ruthie asked if we should remove it. No, I told her. Leave it. I want people to see what it used to be, and what it is now. It was like keeping a scar visible. Not for shame but for truth. I never invited the old board. Not once. But one evening, in early spring, a familiar car pulled up. Mayor Whitlow, Thomas's father. He stepped out in a navy coat, hat in hand. I met him at the door. He didn't ask to come in. He just said, I was wrong. I raised an eyebrow. About you. About what this place could be. You've done something here that we never even imagined. I nodded. That's because your imagination had a velvet ceiling. He smirked slightly. Will you run for town council? I laughed. No, but I'll build one of my own if I have to. He tipped his hat and left. Some wounds never heal clean. They ache in the rain. They remind you where you came from, but they also show you how far you've walked since. As I stood under the chandelier that night, I thought about all the girls like me watching from the outside. I whispered aloud, to no one in particular, you're not meant to squeeze into their world. You're meant to create your own. And so I did, and they came. Spring crept into Hollow Creek like a whispered apology. The snow melted off the rooftops. The creaks ran louder, and the Anderson house shelter stood tall, roots deep, doors open, no sign on the lawn except the one carved above the arch in solid oak. You belong. I didn't write it. Ruthie did. She said she wanted the first thing people saw not to be me, not the story of revenge, not the chandelier, but themselves reflected in wood. I loved that, because this story never really was just mine. As the seasons changed, something shifted. People who once crossed the street when they saw me now waved stiffly. The florist started sending daffodils. Even the grocer stopped charging full price. It wasn't kindness. It was reputation management. They didn't know how to explain it to themselves, much less each other, that the girl they once ignored, dismissed, whispered about, had bought the town's pride and turned it into something noble. And they were slowly realizing something worse than being wrong. They had been ordinary, while I had done something extraordinary. And then came the letters, dozens, from nearby counties, from widows in Ohio, from young women in Alabama, from boys in backwoods who couldn't read but had heard about the lady with the big chandelier who made a place for the broken. Each one told a story. Each one asked, how did you do it? Could I build one too? Will you teach me? And I did. I started writing late into the night, answering every letter, sharing how to organize, how to rally support, how to gather funds without losing your soul. By the first week of May, 3 other shelters were being drafted, one in Mississippi, one in rural Georgia, and one just across the river, in a county where girls had never been allowed to attend high school until the 30s. The chandelier in our ballroom had become a symbol, its picture used in letters, its shape drawn in charcoal by children. It was no longer the crown of the elite. It had become the light of the left out. One afternoon, I was planting herbs in the side garden, lavender, mint, and lemon balm, when I heard someone clear their throat behind me. I turned. It was Evelyn Beauchamp, Clyde's wife. The same Clyde Beauchamp who'd once called my father a dirt floor dreamer. She looked the same: press coat, iron gloves, a scarf that cost more than my whole closet. I'd like a tour, she said. I stood. Of what? Of what you did, she said simply. I hesitated, then handed her a pair of gardening gloves. If you want to see it, I said. You helped tend it. She looked down at the gloves, stunned. Then, slowly, she took them. We walked the halls. She said little, just looked, and nodded, and stared at things that used to be exclusive, now shared. When we reached the ballroom, she paused beneath the chandelier and said, it shines brighter now. I didn't answer, because she was right. By summer, we opened our 3rd dormitory, then a clinic, then a library, built entirely from books donated by women who had once been told they were too emotional to lead. A girl named Marla brought a box of journals. My mother kept these, she said. She cleaned the gala kitchens for 20 years. They never knew she could write. I placed her journals on the highest shelf, not to hide them but because they had earned the highest honor. One July evening, as a warm wind swayed the porch swings, Ruthie came running out, breathless and waving a newspaper. I took it, opened to the 2nd page. There, in bold serif print, it read, From Rejection to Revolution, How a Carpenter's Daughter Reshaped Hollow Creek. The article told the whole story. No edits. No false glamour, just truth. It ended with this. And so Georgia Anderson, once denied a seat at the Christmas Gala, pulled up a whole table instead, then invited everyone in. That night, we had music. Not from a string quartet, but from a fiddler who'd once slept on our floor. Children danced in mismatched shoes. Clara laughed until she snorted. And Ruthie wept quietly in the back, overwhelmed at what we'd built. I stood beneath the chandelier again, and for the first time, I didn't feel like it was hanging above me. I felt like it was standing with me, a silent witness, a humbled relic, a monument to the truth that once seemed impossible, that a girl with a brooch and no invitation could change everything. Autumn had returned to Hollow Creek. It came in soft, amber waves, leaves crumbling under tired boots, air thick with cinnamon and sawdust, and the sharp snap of firewood echoing from chimneys old and new. By then, the Anderson house shelter wasn't just known in town, it had become a landmark. Tourists stopped to take photos. Strangers came to volunteer. Some even came to stay. But something happened that I didn't expect. The town began to change. It started slow. One Saturday, Pastor Jim invited me to speak after his sermon, not from the back pew, but the pulpit. We'd be honored, he said, his eyes kind and certain. I didn't speak about forgiveness. I didn't speak about vengeance. I spoke about belonging. And when I finished, no one clapped. They stood, even the ones who used to whisper. The town council passed a motion to donate land for a sister shelter. The mayor's office issued a formal apology, not for what they said or did, but for what they never corrected when they heard it being said by others. Even Clyde Beauchamp's name was stripped from the old founder's wall. In its place, they etched the names of every volunteer who had spent over 100 hours at the shelter, including Clara, Ruthie, and a 9-year-old boy named Elijah who had swept the front steps every morning for a month. And on the front page of the local paper one quiet Friday in October, this headline appeared: Anderson, a name we tried to forget, and now can't stop remembering. Penelope never came back to town. Her father's estate was sold. Thomas married someone from Charleston, a banker's daughter with the same straight hair and the same vacant laugh. They sent a card that winter, unsigned but postmarked from Savannah. I placed it in the fire, not out of anger, just because it didn't belong in this house, not anymore. But some things surprised me, like the visit from Mrs. Calloway, the old chairwoman of the gala committee, the same woman who once said I was too plain for such an event. She came walking up the steps in a gray shawl, holding a tin of cookies. I brought lemon, she said. You used to like lemon. I didn't ask how she knew. We sat on the porch. She watched the children play in the grass, watched the people she'd once called lost move with purpose and pride, and then she said quietly, I spent my whole life guarding a door no one asked me to protect. It was the closest I'd ever get to an apology, and it was enough. The chandelier in the ballroom stayed. By then it had become more than just a relic, it was a conversation. New guests always asked why I'd kept it, and I'd always answer the same, because I want people to remember what once hung above them, and how it shines brighter now that it belongs to everyone. We started hosting gatherings, not galas. We called them home nights. No dress codes, no gold-lined invitations, no seating charts, just long tables, mismatched candles, and voices singing out of tune. People read poems. Clara told stories from the Depression. Ruthie taught everyone how to play spoons like drums. One night, a girl stood up, barely 15, and read a letter she'd written to herself. She had lived under a staircase for months. She'd never worn a dress to church. She'd never been hugged without flinching. But now she had a key to her own room, and the last line of her letter read, to the girl they said didn't belong, you do now. You always did. They were just looking in the wrong direction. We cried, of course, but not sad tears. They were the kind of tears you shed when the mountain has been climbed, and you finally sit and look back, not to mourn, but to marvel. One evening, while closing up the reading room, I stood before the old mirror in the hallway. The same mirror that once reflected cold stares and colder intentions. Now it showed something else entirely. A woman. Worn, yes, but rooted. Eyes softer, spine straighter. And beside her, carved into the wood of the frame, were initials. Jura, not just my name, my place. In the end, they had tried to break me, tried to convince me that acceptance was earned through silence, and power was gifted by gatekeepers. But I had rewritten every rule they ever taught me. I didn't just knock on the door. I bought the house. I opened the gates. And I never built a wall again. I sometimes wonder if they even remember that night, the Christmas gala, the red gowns, the silver cutlery, The glittering laughter. Do they remember the girl in the snow, the one in borrowed boots and a too-thin coat, standing behind the gate, trying not to look like she wanted in? Because I do. I remember everything. The chill in my spine. The way my name wasn't even glanced at on the guest list. The way Thomas looked past me. The way the light spilled out from inside and never touched where I stood. And now, all these years later, I don't just remember that night. I've rewritten it. Every Christmas now, we host what we call the Undash Gala. No diamonds. No chandeliers polished to look richer than they are. No velvet ropes or names ranked by lineage. Just people, warmed by soup, wrapped in donated scarves, singing off-key carols and laughing until their cheeks hurt. We fill the ballroom with life, not performance. That's the secret they never understood. Elegance isn't an exclusivity. It's an invitation. This year, I stood by the grand doors again, same doors that once denied me, but now I stood on the inside, holding them open wide. Clara and Ruthie were beside me. Lana, the little girl we took in our first winter, now 12, played a piano melody that fluttered like dandelions across the floor. Volunteers danced with children whose names they hadn't known a week ago. The chandelier glowed like fire caught in ice, and I stood with my hands folded, heart full, watching. The most beautiful sight I'd ever seen, belonging. In motion, after everyone had eaten, and laughter had spilled into warm, sleepy silence, I was asked to speak. I wasn't prepared. I never write speeches. I just speak from the same place that once begged to be heard. So I stepped onto the small, wooden stage and looked at the crowd, and I said, I was once told this place wasn't for me. That I was just a girl with a loud voice and no reason to be heard. That I didn't have the right kind of name, or the right kind of face, or the right kind of future. And maybe they were right. But if that's true, then I stand here as the biggest mistake they ever made. Laughter, applause. But I wasn't done. You don't owe anyone silence to earn a place at their table. And if they won't pull out a chair for you, build your own table. Build a house. Open every door. And when they come knocking, let them in. And tell them, this is what it looks like when love finishes what revenge started. Silence fell, and then rose into a thunder of claps, cheers, and a single, unashamed sob from the back row. It was Evelyn Beauchamp, and she was smiling. That night, I stayed long after the last cup had been washed. I walked through the sleeping shelter, quilt over my shoulders, checking each room like a mother might. The fire had dimmed, but the warmth hadn't. I found myself once again under the chandelier. I looked up. It sparkled but gently now, not like a crown, more like a constellation, something that didn't claim glory but showed direction. I sat beneath it and whispered into the silence, we did it. And then I asked, as I sometimes do, what would that girl in the snow think now? The answer always feels the same. She wouldn't believe it, but she'd recognize it. She always knew this was possible. So let me ask you, reader, have you ever been denied something simply because of who you were? Have you ever stood outside a door, wondering why others walked in so easily? Have you ever been told to wait your turn, even when you built the road they walked on? And if the answer is yes, then know this. Your story isn't over. It's just getting interesting. Subscribe to more revenge story. Share, like, comment, because somewhere, someone else is being turned away. And maybe you'll be the one who opens the next door.